Welcome to Johnny Carson Files. Tonight, Tim Conway walks onto the Tonight Show stage carrying a sealed manila envelope he has refused to explain to anyone. Not to the producers, not to Ed McMahon, not to the stage manager who asked him about it twice in the green room, not to the security guard who clocked it at the door and wrote it down in his log as personal item, talent, do not inventory. For 11 years, Tim Conway has kept what is inside that envelope in the back of a filing cabinet in his home office, behind tax documents and old scripts and all the other things people keep in filing cabinets, precisely because they do not want to look at them too often. They want them close, but not visible. They want them preserved, but not confronted. That is exactly where Tim kept this, for 11 years, 3 months, and 17 days. But tonight, he is taking it out. Tonight, he is bringing it here, to this desk, to this man, to these cameras, to the 40-foot arc lights blazing above Studio One at NBC Burbank, to the 300 people sitting in those warm rows who came tonight expecting Tim Conway to make them laugh until they could not breathe. They are going to leave having done something else entirely. They came for laughter. They are about to receive something that does not have a clean name, something that will stay with them long after the studio lights go dark, and the cameras stop rolling, and the parking lot empties out, and they drive home in the California night with the radio off, thinking about it. And when Johnny Carson opens that envelope and pulls out what is inside, he will not speak for 3 full minutes. The audience will not make a sound. The orchestra will stop mid-note. Ed McMahon will half rise from his chair and then slowly sit back down because he does not know what else to do. The camera operators will make decisions without being directed. And America will watch the king of late-night television sit with something so unexpected, so quietly devastating, that the entire polished machinery of the most successful show in television history will simply cease to function. That is what one photograph can do. But to understand what is in that photograph, you have to go back 11 years. You have to go back to the worst night of Tim Conway's life. And you have to understand why he picked up a camera instead of the phone. But before we go there, I want to say something to the people watching right now. I see it every week in the comments. People who did not realize they had not subscribed. If this channel has ever given you something worth having, take 5 seconds and check. It is free. It changes everything for us. And in a way, it is how this story keeps getting told. Thank you for being here. September 14th, 1967. Tim Conway was 33 years old. McHale's Navy had ended its run the previous year, and Tim was navigating that particular Hollywood silence that follows the cancellation of a successful series. The offers were circling, the recognition was there, but the certainty was not. The next chapter was not yet written, and in Hollywood, the space between chapters has a weight people outside the industry rarely understand. It feels like standing in a doorway, not outside, not inside, just waiting to see which direction the draft comes from. Tim was living in a rented house in the San Fernando Valley with his first wife and their children, carrying the particular loneliness that comes from being publicly funny and privately exhausted. He had developed a ritual in those months that he would not have called a ritual at the time. He would have called it just something he did. Every weeknight, after the house went quiet, he would sit in the small den at the back of the house, turn on the television, and watched The Tonight Show. Not for research, not professionally. He watched it the way a man watches a fire when there is nothing else that needs doing, and the night is long. He watched it because Johnny Carson made the world feel manageable, made the world feel like a place that still had warmth in it, even when warmth was not available in the specific room where Tim happened to be sitting. Made the world feel like a place worth staying in, even on the nights when that was not obvious. September 14th was a Thursday. The Tonight Show had been running since 11:30 p.m. Eastern, which meant it was coming through Tim's television in Burbank at 8:30 Pacific, his usual time. His phone rang at 9:47 p.m., his sister's voice on the other end. She did not say hello. She said Tim, and that was enough. He already knew. Their father, Daniel Conway, had been declining for months. The heart that had carried him through 71 years of a quiet, extraordinary working-class life had simply stopped. Tim's sister gave him the details. Peaceful. In his sleep, no suffering. The words people use when they need the words to do the work of comfort because nothing else can. Tim thanked her. He said he would call back in the morning with details about arrangements. He hung up the phone. He sat in the den for a long time without moving. Wait, do not miss what happens next. Because what Tim Conway did in the next 30 minutes is the really standing in Johnny Carson's studio 11 years later with a sealed envelope in his hands. He did not call anyone. He did not go wake his wife. He did not pour a drink, or pace the kitchen, or do any of the things people do when the ground shifts. He sat in the chair, and after a long time of sitting in the dark, he reached out and turned up the volume on the television just slightly, enough to fill the room. Johnny was still in a bit. Something about a county fair, a fried dough vendor, a prize-winning hog, with strong opinions about the judging panel. The bit was building the way only Johnny could build things. Each detail placed precisely. Each escalation arriving exactly when the audience had stopped expecting it. The audience was helpless. Tim Conway sat in the dark den on the worst night of his adult life and watched Johnny Carson dismantle 300 people with laughter. And something happened that Tim would spend 11 years trying to explain to himself before he finally understood it clearly enough to put it in an envelope and drive to NBC with it. He picked up his camera. It was sitting on the end table next to the chair, a 35mm film camera he had been meaning to take in for repairs because the shutter release was stiff. He picked it up. He did not think about it. He pointed it at the television screen. Johnny was mid-gesture, one hand raised, index finger extended to make a point about the hog's apparent grievances. And Tim pressed the shutter. One photograph, one click in the dark. He set the camera back on the end table and sat with the television for another hour. Eventually, the show ended. He turned off the set and went to bed. He developed the film a week later, along with a roll from a birthday party for one of the children. When the photographs came back from the lab, he stood in the kitchen going through them. Birthday party, birthday party, birthday cake, and then one image that did not fit. A slightly grainy, slightly overexposed photograph of a television screen glowing in a dark room. Johnny Carson's face mid-gesture, visible and clear. The studio audience behind him a warm amber blur. The whole image carrying the quality of something private. Something that happened in a room, not meant to be seen. Tim held it for a long time. Then he turned it over. He took a pen from the counter. He wrote a date on the back in pencil, September 14, 1967. He put it in a manila envelope. He sealed it. He put the envelope in the back of the filing cabinet in his home office. He left it there. But what you have seen so far is nothing compared to what Tim Conway was carrying alongside that photograph for 11 years. Because the photograph was only part of the story. What he did not put in the filing cabinet, what he kept instead in a small blue notebook in his desk drawer, was something he had started the very next morning after his father died. He had sat at his desk before the rest of the house woke up, in the gray quiet of a September morning, with the phone call still ahead of him, and the arrangements still to make, and all the machinery of loss not yet fully in motion. He opened a new notebook to the first page, and he wrote a single date, September 14, 1967. Underneath it, 3 words. He was there. That was the first entry. Over the next 11 years, Tim would add to that notebook 46 more times. Not every night, not every week. He was not keeping a diary. He was not documenting. He was recording the specific moments when the show had crossed the distance between a television screen and whatever room he happened to be in, and done something that nothing else in that room could do. The nights when a bit landed so perfectly that the laughter pulled him out of something he had been stuck in for days. The nights when a guest said something true, and Johnny listened with his whole face, with complete attention, with the quality of presence that made even strangers feel genuinely seen. The nights on the road in hotel rooms between shows, when the familiar opening titles appeared on the screen, and something in Tim's chest unknotted slightly, just enough. The nights when the world felt small, and the television made it feel bigger. The nights when the world felt too big, and the television made it feel like someone else was keeping watch. 47 entries in 11 years. A private accounting that he never showed to anyone, never mentioned in any interview, never referenced in any of the hundreds of conversations he had about Johnny Carson over the course of a long career. A record that existed for no one but himself, until October of 1978, when he decided it was time for it to exist for someone else. October 3, 1978. Tim Conway arrived at NBC Studios in Burbank at 3:45 p.m. for a 5:30 taping. He had the manila envelope under his arm. He had the small blue notebook in his jacket's inside pocket. The stage manager noticed both immediately. He noted the envelope because Tim Conway did not carry things. Tim Conway arrived at tapings, carrying nothing except the particular physical comedy that traveled with him everywhere as involuntary luggage. But today there was an envelope, and a visible rectangular shape in his jacket pocket. The stage manager asked if either was something for the show. Tim said the envelope was personal, for Johnny, before the show. 5 minutes later, Tim was walking toward Johnny's dressing room. Nobody on the crew heard what was said in that room. The door was closed for 14 minutes. The stage manager knocked once during that time. Johnny said through the closed door, "Give us a minute." Nobody on the crew had ever heard Johnny Carson ask for more time before a show, not once in 15 years. When the door finally opened, the two men who emerged were not quite the same men who had gone in. Fred de Cordova, the show's longtime producer, standing near the control booth and watching his host walk toward the makeup room, would later describe Johnny's expression as the look of a man who has just been handed a weight he did not know he had been missing. Not grief exactly, something quieter. The particular recognition that comes when a piece of information you have never had suddenly make something else whose makes sense. Johnny said nothing to the crew. He went to the mirror and sat down and let the makeup artist begin her work. But de Cordova noticed that in the mirror's reflection, Johnny's hands resting in his lap between adjustments were not entirely still. Not shaking, just not entirely still. The difference was small. De Cordova had been watching Johnny Carson for long enough to know what it meant. The show began at 5:30 p.m., exactly. Johnny's monologue was technically immaculate. The timing was perfect. Ed McMahon, sitting to Johnny's left, with the attention of a man who had spent 15 years reading another man's rhythms, sensed it immediately. Not that something was wrong. That tonight was loaded differently. During the first commercial break, he leaned in. "You all right?" Johnny looked at him. "In about 30 minutes, something is going to happen on this stage that I need to happen. I need you to let it go wherever it goes. Don't flag the producers. Don't signal for commercial early. Whatever you see, just let it be." Ed started to ask why. "You trust me?" Johnny asked. "Always," Ed said. "Then trust me tonight," Johnny said, and the cameras went back on. At 6:11 p.m., Ed McMahon's voice filled the studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, he has made you laugh until your sides hurt, until you begged him to stop, until the person beside you on the couch looked at you with genuine concern for your structural integrity. Please welcome the irresistible, the unstoppable, the irreplaceable Tim Conway." The audience erupted. Tim came through the curtain. He walked directly into a small decorative side table near the stage, stopped, regarded it with the expression of a man encountering a philosophical problem he lacked the tools to solve. Looked at the audience, looked back at the table, moved around it with elaborate care, and then immediately walked into the edge of the desk itself. The audience was already gone before he made it to the chair. He shook Johnny's hand. He sat down. He looked at the audience with that face, the one that seemed to suggest he was mildly puzzled by the existence of chairs, by the concept of sitting, by the whole arrangement of the studio and his continued presence in it. Laughter, sustained, genuine laughter. Johnny leaned forward, smiling. "Tim, it is always great to have you." Tim Conway looked at Johnny. He reached inside his jacket, pulled out the manila envelope, and set it on the desk between them, both hands flat on top of it. He looked at Johnny and said, "I brought you something. I need you to open it on camera." Johnny's eyes went to the envelope immediately. The smile did not go anywhere, but the eyes shifted and sharpened. "Should I be worried, Tim?" "Probably," Tim said. "But open it anyway." The audience laughed, certain this was the setup, certain that whatever was in the envelope was going to produce a prop or a rubber hand or some other piece of Conway chaos. Johnny reached for it, playing the straight man the way he always played it, with perfect composure, and just enough visible apprehension to sell the setup. He held the envelope and looked at Tim again, about to make a joke. And then he stopped, because Tim Conway was not setting up a bit. Tim Conway was sitting across from him with his hands in his lap and his face completely, unusually, unnervingly still. The throttle was closed. The man in that chair was not doing television. He was just sitting there, waiting, with a look in his eyes that Johnny recognized from somewhere, but could not immediately name. Johnny opened the envelope. He pulled out a photograph. He held it by the edges and looked at it. And Johnny Carson, the most composed person in the history of American late-night television, a man who had interviewed 4 presidents without once losing his footing on live air, went absolutely and completely still. His mouth opened slightly, closed. His right hand came up slowly and pressed flat against his jaw. He did not speak. He did not look at the audience. He did not look at the camera. He looked at the photograph. The orchestra was not playing. Ed McMahon had gone completely still. The director in the control room stopped mid-sentence. 47 seconds. 1 minute. A minute and a half. Johnny Carson sat with the photograph and said nothing, and the studio sat with Johnny. 2 minutes. The 300 people in those warm amber-lit rows did not move. Not a cough. Not a program rustling. The particular silence of a room that has recognized something true is happening and has decided collectively to protect it. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. 3 minutes. Exactly. 3 minutes from the moment Johnny pulled the photograph from the envelope. He lowered it slowly to the desk. He did not let go of it. His fingers stayed on the edges. He looked at Tim Conway. Tim, he said. Just the name. His voice was different. Not the television voice. Just a man's voice in a room. When was this taken? Tim looked at the audience, then at the camera, then back at Johnny. His voice was steady. September 14th, 1967. The night my father died. The studio did not make a sound. What happened next has never been fully told, until now. Johnny turned the photograph over. He read the date written on the back in Tim's pencil. He held it for another long moment, just looking at the handwriting. 7 characters in soft pencil on the back of a photograph that was never meant to leave a filing cabinet. Then he set it face up on the desk between them and said, very quietly, "Tell me." Tim Conway straightened slightly in the guest chair. He was not going to make a joke. Anyone watching could see it with absolute clarity. The man who had spent 20 years turning the world's anxiety into laughter had made a different decision tonight. Was holding to it consciously, was going to say what he came to say, regardless of what it cost him professionally, regardless of how strange it felt to sit in this chair, and, be honest, instead of funny, he was going to take the armor off in front of everyone. My father died on a Thursday night in September, Tim said. His voice was quiet but clear. I got the call around 10. The house was asleep. I went and sat in the den. I turned the TV on. I don't know why exactly. I just didn't want the silence. He paused. You were doing a bit. The county fair. Something about a prize-winning pig with strong opinions about the judging panel. A sound moved through the audience, somewhere between recognition and something more tender. Johnny was looking at him with complete, unguarded attention. I had my camera on the end table, Tim continued. I'd been meaning to get it repaired. I picked it up. You were mid-bit, and the television was the only light in the room. And I just pointed the camera at the screen and took the picture. He paused. I didn't plan it. I didn't think about it. It just felt like the most honest thing I could do at that moment. He looked at the photograph between them. I developed it a week later. When it came back from the lab, I stood in the kitchen holding it for a long time, and I wrote the date on the back, and I put it in an envelope, and I kept it. He looked at Johnny, because it was the truest record I had of what that night actually was. Not the phone call, not the arrangements in the morning. That picture. A television screen glowing in a dark room. You in it, still working, still going, still making the world feel like a place that had some light in it, even when I couldn't find the light myself. Johnny Carson's jaw was tight, his eyes were closed. He was listening the way he listened when something mattered. With everything, with his whole face. Tim reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the small blue notebook. He set it on the desk next to the photograph. He opened it to the first page and slid it across toward Johnny. Johnny looked down at it. The page showed a date in Tim's handwriting, September 14, 1967. 3 words beneath it. He was there. And beneath that, 46 more entries. Dates, notes. 11 years of a private record kept for no one but the man keeping it. Johnny looked at the notebook for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. He did not try to prevent it. How many entries? Tim said, 47. 47 nights, 22 years. The studio erupted with something that was not applause and was not crying, but contained both of them, and more besides. The sound of a room absorbing a number that was larger than expected. 47, 22 years. The arithmetic of one life intersecting with another, across a glass screen, and whatever invisible distance separates the person watching from the person being watched. Johnny Carson closed the notebook carefully. He sat with it for a moment, his hands resting on the cover. Then, he looked at the audience, not with the professional warmth he deployed for crowd acknowledgement, but with the look of a person who has stopped performing. I have been doing this job for 15 years, Johnny said. His voice was very quiet, but the microphone held it to every corner. And the thing that keeps me up some nights is that you send it out and you never know where it lands. He looked at Tim. You are talking to a lens. Behind the lens is a control room. Behind the control room is a transmitter. Behind the transmitter are 26 million people in 26 million different rooms in 26 million different circumstances. And you can never know which one of them is sitting in a dark room with a camera on the end table. You just keep going and trust that it is reaching something. He paused. You just told me it reached something. Specifically, with dates, Tim nodded. That is why I kept the list, Tim said. So the numbers could do the talking for both of us. Because I knew I wouldn't be able to. He looked at the notebook. They've been waiting 11 years to do exactly this. For a long time, neither man spoke. The studio held the silence warmly, without pressure. Then Johnny reached for the notebook and opened it again. Not to read it, just to look at the handwriting. The cramped, careful, 11 years accumulated handwriting of a man who had been keeping a private record of gratitude, with no expectation of ever delivering it. He held it for a long time. Then he did something nobody expected. He turned to the nearest camera. He held the notebook up, open, so that America could see the handwriting, not the specific words, just the fact of it. The visible fact of 47 dates across 22 years. The visible fact that someone had been keeping count. He held it there for a long moment. Then he set it down and looked at Tim. I want to tell you something, Johnny said. And I need to say it in front of all of them, because it only means what it should mean if it has witnesses. He turned to face Tim directly. I know exactly what night you are talking about, the State Fair bit. September of '67. I remember it. Tim went still. I remember it specifically, Johnny continued, because my father had died 4 months before, April of 1967, and I had not talked about it publicly, not once. I had come to this desk every night and done the job, because that was what I knew how to do, and the grief was there. But the cameras were also there, and you learned to put things in their boxes. He looked at his hands. That night, the State Fair bit, something let go in me during that taping. I stopped thinking about the boxes. I just did the bit the way it needed to be done, and the audience went with it completely, and for 45 minutes I forgot that my father was gone. He stopped. When I went home that night, I sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside, because I wasn't ready to stop feeling whatever I had felt in that studio. He looked at Tim. You were in your den with the television on, and your father newly gone. And I was sitting in my driveway in Malibu, not ready to go inside. And neither of us knew the other existed in that way. We were both using the same 45 minutes of television for the same thing. The same light in the same dark. The studio made that sound again. Not one thing, but all of them at once. A woman in the fourth row had both hands pressed over her mouth. The man beside her had his arm around her shoulders. Ed McMahon had stopped pretending to compose himself. The camera operators were working on instinct now, finding frames no director had called, following something beyond direction. I was saving my own life that night, Tim, Johnny said, his voice barely above a murmur, without either of us knowing it. Across 2 dark rooms and 40 miles of California night, we were doing it for each other, neither of us knowing, both of us needing it. The silence in the studio deepened into the particular silence that descends when the most important thing that could be said in a room has just been said, and everything after it is processing, rather than waiting. Then Tim Conway did something that the producers would later call the most unexpected thing that had ever happened on The Tonight Show. He reached back into his jacket pocket. One more item, a small white envelope, unsealed. He set it on the desk beside the notebook. Johnny looked at it. What is this? Tim said. That's for you to take home. Don't open it here. Johnny picked it up. What is it? Tim said. It's the first entry. Written out in full. The whole night. September 14th, 1967. Everything I remember about what it was and what the show was and what it did for me. The whole thing. Not just the 3 words in the notebook. I wrote it out completely 6 months ago when I decided I was coming here to do this. I needed to do it for myself before I could do it for you. Johnny held the small envelope the way you hold something that is both weightless and impossibly significant. Then he placed it inside the blue notebook and closed the cover. I'll keep them together, Johnny said. That's where it belongs, Tim said. The show ran 22 minutes over its scheduled runtime that night. NBC received no complaints from affiliates. The switchboard was overwhelmed by 11:40 p.m. Eastern, before the broadcast had even ended on the West Coast. By midnight, every line in the building was busy. By 3 a.m., the calls were still coming in. Not from fans specifically, from people who had their own dark room, their own September night, their own television screen that was the only light available at a moment when they had needed light more than they had needed anything else. People called to describe specific nights, specific episodes, specific moments that had reached them through the screen at exactly the right time. The staff answering the phones started writing the calls down. They ran out of paper and started writing on the backs of script pages. They filled those too. The Tonight Show received more than 40,000 letters in the 2 weeks following that broadcast. They were sorted by hand by production assistants working overtime, by interns who stayed past midnight because they could not stop reading them. The recurring theme, showing up in handwriting from every state in the country, was some version of a single sentence in 1,000 different forms. I have my own list. The producers of The Carol Burnett Show, said Tim Conway, arrived at rehearsal 2 days later, changed in a way that was real and visible and difficult to precisely describe. Havar Corman, who had spent years sitting across from Tim in sketches and made the failure to maintain a straight face his signature contribution to American comedy, pulled Tim aside before rehearsal. He held him by both shoulders. I saw the broadcast, Harvey said. I know, Tim said. Are you all right? I think so, Tim said. For the first time in a long time. I think so. Johnny Carson kept the blue notebook and the small white envelope inside it, in the wooden box in his home office, alongside things that were not for professional display or public consumption, things that were true in the private way, rather than the television way. In a quiet interview conducted after his retirement from The Tonight Show in 1992, a reporter asked what he considered the single most important broadcast of his 30-year career. He did not hesitate. October 3, 1978, he said. Tim Conway brought me a photograph of my own face, taken in the dark on the night his father died, kept for 11 years because he thought it belonged to me. He also brought me a notebook with 47 entries in it, 22 years of specific nights, 47 dates. He handed them across the desk on live television because he thought I needed to know they existed. He paused. He was right. I needed to know. I just didn't know. I needed to know until the notebook was in my hands. He looked at the reporter. You spend 30 years talking to cameras. You tell yourself it must be reaching people because the ratings say people are watching. But that is statistics. That is aggregate data. What Tim Conway gave me that night was not aggregate data. It was 47 specific dates. One man's private record of the times a television show kept him company in the dark. That is different from ratings. That is completely different. That is the whole job. That is what the job is actually for. Tim Conway passed away on May 14, 2019. He was 85 years old. Among the tributes that followed, the one that drew the most attention came from a statement released by Johnny Carson's estate. Brief, precise, characteristic of the man who had spent a lifetime saying the most important things in the fewest possible words. It read, in 1967, Tim Conway watched Johnny Carson on television on the worst night of his life and took a photograph of the screen so he would have a record of the light. In 1978, he brought the photograph to Johnny's desk and told him what it meant. For 50 years, the world laughed with Tim Conway. Tonight, we are grateful that he stayed and that he came back to say thank you. Among Tim's personal effects, his family found the filing cabinet in the home office. In the back, behind the tax documents and scripts and the lease agreements and the accumulated paperwork of a long life in television, there was a manila envelope that had been sitting there for 40 years. Inside, a copy of the photograph. Tim had made it before bringing the original to NBC in October of 1978. Not certain he was ready to part with it completely. Not certain he could walk out of that studio without taking something of it with him. On the back of the copy, in Tim Conway's handwriting, not a date this time, 6 words. He was there. So was I. And so tonight are you. That is more than enough. That has always been enough. If this story reached you tonight, do one thing before you close this window. Think of the person whose light you have been watching from a dark room. The one who does not know you are there. The one who does not know what they mean to you. The one who kept going and in keeping going, kept you going. You do not need a manila envelope. You do not need a studio or a camera or a live audience. You do not need 11 years to pass before you say it. You just need to say it. Because somewhere right now, someone is keeping a list with your name at the top of it. They have been keeping it for years, 47 entries, or 4, or 1. It doesn't matter the number. What matters is that they kept it. What matters is that you were worth keeping count of. Let them show it to you. Subscribe so you never miss these stories. Share this with someone who has been your light in the dark. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me whose face you would photograph if you had the camera and the dark room and the moment. Tell me who is on your list. Because the most powerful thing any of us can do is stay. And then when the time is right, go back and say thank you.